Hi, my name's Ben King. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Pennsylvania, and today we're going to be talking about the roommate phase. What does that mean? How do you get out of it? So first, the overview. Why is this important to talk about? What is the roommate phase? How do we end up there? What's the connected phase? How do we get there? And then highlights and takeaways as always. All right, so first, why is this important to talk about? If you've been in a long-term relationship, chances are that you've been in this type of phase where you just feel like roommates, you feel like ships passing in the night, business partners, etc., etc. Chances are you've been here for some span of time. Unfortunately, for a lot of relationships, this isn't obvious. It can be a subtle thing, and it can take a toll on both individuals and the relationship as a whole. And for a lot of couples, you're not going to be able to get out of here on accident. It's not something where you come to the roommate phase and you're just going to be able to get out of it without actively working on it. So it's important to be able to catch it. And then by exploring it, being able to recognize if you have this dynamic, that enables you to be able to work through it together. That enables the two of you to be able to talk about it and get on the same team so that you can find your way out instead of being there but just blaming each other for where the relationship is at. All right, so what is the roommate phase? It's often described as just feeling like roommates. For most couples, this means the disappearance of the special connection that you have in a relationship. So instead of feeling like a team, instead of feeling like you can go to that person for support, connection, whether that's emotional or physical, it feels like they're just someone that you live with. It feels like they're just your roommate. You might work together with each other to get household tasks done, to be able to raise your kids together. But it doesn't feel like you're in an intimate relationship anymore. I mean, it often feels very transactional, that you communicate almost exclusively about logistical things, again, just day-to-day things, but it's rare that you actually talk about whether it's your feelings, what's going on during a day in terms of how it impacts you, how it feels. I mean, again, you might talk about like, oh, I did this, I did that, but there's not the depth to it that, okay, this happened and this is how it affected me and this is what I did, etc., etc. Usually couples in the roommate phase actually don't get into a lot of fights or arguments with each other, but their relationship has become very limited. It's not nearly as satisfying, as fulfilling as it was before. Again, these couples often don't feel angry with each other, but instead they feel ambivalent about the relationship, that the relationship doesn't pull a lot of emotion from them. It's also one of the most common reasons that affairs happen, that I don't feel this special connection in my marriage, in my relationship. And so I start to feel this connection maybe with someone at work. And so I'm naturally drawn towards that person. I'm not saying that it's justified or that it's right, but it can be one of the most common reasons for it. And then the roommate phase can further degrade their relationship. And so it can get to a point where there is a lot of fights and unhappiness. But to me, the way that I look at it is that that's now out of the roommate phase. It's maybe in the conflict phase or whatever you want to call it. But again, the roommate phase oftentimes is described as ambivalence, just feeling like roommates, not necessarily feeling at odds with each other. And so how do we end up here? How do we end up in the roommate phase? So couples will usually find themselves here if they haven't prioritized their relationship appropriately. And so this isn't surprising. It's incredibly hard to do this over the long haul when you have different life stages and transitions in your life. And just because you've been together for so long, I mean, it can be really difficult to year after year to continue to prioritize each other in that type of way. But a few major factors. Having children. I'm sure for a lot of couples who have children, if you're listening to this right now, you can probably resonate that having children really just completely shifts the dynamic of the relationship. That beforehand, maybe you're really prioritizing each other, maybe prioritizing work, things like that, but you're prioritizing each other. But when you have kids, it's so easy to just get into the roles of parents, that instead of we're in a relationship, we're really trying with each other to increase that intimacy, again, whether it's emotional or physical, that we're just in parent mode right now. A very common sentiment that I often hear is, yeah, when we were dating or when we were married before kids, we would go out on dates maybe once a week, maybe once every other week. And since having kids, I mean, it's been months or maybe even years since we've had just one night where it's just been the two of us. I mean, that's a really common sentiment, which again is understandable, but I think it just shows how easy it can be to kind of fall into the trap of just being parents. Then it takes an incredible amount of time and energy to raise a child. And so again, that's why it's so easy to just prioritize them, because after you're done taking care of them, it can be a great challenge to even just make mental and emotional energy for the other person. So I think that's a huge one. Another one is just being together for a long time and getting complacent. So when we've been together for years, we're much more likely to go on autopilot. And so again, it's not this day-to-day, I have this resentment against the other person, I'm intentionally not prioritizing them. It's usually just, again, going on autopilot, where we just get used to going through the motions, which again isn't a terrible thing, but that's why it can get us into this trap of being in the roommate phase. I mean, if you compare it to getting into a relationship, in that type of stage of the relationship, we're trying our hardest to make the other person feel cared for, to make them feel satisfied, to make them know that we're interested in them. But as time goes on, I mean, it's easy to take each other for granted. Another sentiment that I hear is that they should just know that I love them. That should be enough. Like I shouldn't have to do anything. They should just know that I love them and be okay with that. And I think in theory, I mean, maybe that makes sense, but I think in practice, that's just not how people work. That sure, I might know that you love me, but if I'm not feeling like you're valuing me in the day-to-day, then of course I'm going to start feeling differently. And if that happens day after day for, again, months and months and years, then of course I'm going to get to a place where, yeah, maybe I know that you love me, but I'm not feeling that feeling on a day-to-day basis. And I think that in a long-term relationship, that's what you need to keep up. So another piece is having a breakdown in communication. So if you're in the relationship phase, it's going to be almost impossible to be able to get out of it if you're not able to communicate about any roadblocks that are in your way. Because if you're not able to communicate about them, those roadblocks are going to continue to be there. And so for a lot of couples, this is what keeps you feeling like roommates, that if we're not talking about it, or if I'm not even comfortable to be able to bring something up, that if I say to myself, well, I could bring this up to them, but they're just going to deflect or blame me or get defensive, then I'm not even going to try to bring this up. Then again, that's not going to get us anywhere. And it could contribute to even more resentment and removing that special feeling of the relationship if day after day I don't feel like you're going to be able to hear me out. And so what is the connected phase? So not being in the roommate phase, what should that feel like? It should feel like you're on a team with the other person, that you look at them as your intimate partner. Again, it's not all rainbows and butterflies. It's not going to be every single day you just feel this love swelling up in your heart. I mean, that's just not realistic. What it should look like is feeling like a team, that you still have that special feeling to some extent. Even if you have kids, I still feel like we make room for being a couple with each other, that maybe our lives are really dominated by our kids, but I still feel like we carve out time. And again, that could be spending time alone, just talking. It could be texting each other more intentionally throughout the day. It could be just leaving little notes for each other around the house. Again, this could be anything. It could be being more physically intimate, and that doesn't just mean sex. That could be more physically intimate in terms of holding hands, cuddling on the couch, cuddling in bed before you go to sleep or in the morning, something like that. Or maybe going on a date every week, every other week, once every 3 weeks, something like that. I mean, it could be a ton of different things. It essentially means that the relationship is going well, even if we have disagreements, even if we have tiffs and spats here and there. Overall, we still feel like we're on the same page with each other. And so how do we get there? So if you find yourself in the roommate phase and want to get out of it and want to stay out of that roommate phase, what do you do? So first, figure out what got you to that place. And so is it that you've just not been prioritizing your couple relationship and you just have to put some more work into that? Is it that there are resentments or sticking points that's getting in the way or not making you feel comfortable or really wanting to relate to each other more in an intimate type of way? So when you've figured that out, try to talk about it. Make space for each other so that you both can share your different perspectives and experiences and to be able to talk through what got you to this place. This is a crucial step. When you do this, try your best to not blame each other or get into a tit for tat or anything like that. Just try to hear each other out and expect that the other person is going to feel differently and see things differently, but not to get into a battle of who's right and who's wrong. Just try to, again, just to be able to understand where the other person's coming from. And so once you've done that, once you've talked through it to understand each other, it's time to think of solutions. So despite what you have going on in life, carve out time for each other and don't let your relationship go by the wayside. Again, this could look many different ways. There's no cookie cutter. This is exactly what you have to do. But carve out time for each other in whatever way works. And figure out what your relationship needs and stick to that as much as possible. So for example, if we're both really busy, but we make sure we have 30 minutes just to ourselves at the end of the night where we're engaged, maybe that's what's going to work for us. Whereas maybe other couples, we don't need it every night. We just need a span of time, maybe once a week. Once a week we have a few hours where it's just us. Again, to be able to find out what works for you. And take more of an interest in the other person's life. So even if you've been together for years, still genuinely ask the other person how they're doing, what's been going on in their life, what's been going on at work, with their friends, just in their own mind. Really ask them in that genuine type of way and be curious about that. And I mean, maybe the first time you do this, the other person isn't going to really resonate. They might give you the same cookie cutter answer, but I think being very explicit, like, hey, I would really like to know how you're doing. I mean, that's something that I want to prioritize with the two of us. I think that can make it easier in the long term for those conversations to happen. And then make bids for connection more often. So every day, there are ways to show your spouse that you care about them, that you're interested in them, that you value them. Now, again, I'm not expecting that for any relationship, you're going to do this hundreds of times or even tens of times during the day. I think a handful of bids for connection throughout the day would be great. I think that would be more than enough, but it's just taking advantage of the time that you could use for that. And so I would encourage you to think of a few main ways that would resonate for the other person. So is it bringing them a cup of coffee like I mentioned in previous videos? Is it expressing appreciation for something that they did? Is it complimenting their appearance? Is it giving them a spontaneous hug or kiss? Again, I think finding maybe something that feels natural to you to do or something that resonates with them, I think could be really helpful. And then being more physically close. So again, this could mean sex if that's something that both of you are really wanting to work on, but it could also mean other ways of physical closeness. So making a conscious effort to have more of that physical connection that both of you enjoy. So again, does it just mean sitting and holding hands? Does it mean laying down and cuddling, more hugging and kissing? Or does it mean more frequent sex, or maybe the same frequency of sex, but having sex in different ways so that both of you feel very satisfied and feel good about it? All right, and so highlights and takeaways. So feeling like roommates is not something to feel ashamed of or to blame yourself for. It's an incredibly common dynamic that can really sneak up on us. So give yourself and give each other some slack. The most important part is to recognize it, get on the same page with your partner, and try to work together to fix it. Not to kind of order the other person, like you do this thing differently, you have to do this other thing differently. Try to work together, come together on the same team and work towards it. And then to be able to look for solutions that will be specific for your relationship. And so for this one, try to get creative. Don't just think about, okay, what's one thing that another person says that we have to do? Think about what would help me, what would help you, and try to talk about those things. Again, what works for one couple might not work for you whatsoever, and vice versa. So I think asking yourself, asking each other, what could I do differently to feel like a couple? what could you do differently? What could my partner do differently to get us back to that special feeling in this relationship? It's a difficult process, one that is much easier said than done, but I think intentionally moving forward together and talking about these things is really setting yourselves up for success. And as I always say, if this is something that feels too difficult to work through just by yourselves, that's a great thing to be able to go to a couples therapist like myself to be able to talk through and work through to get out of that phase. But that is pretty much it for today. I hope it was helpful. If you think anyone, whether it's your spouse, whether it's a friend or a family member, you think it would be helpful for them, feel free to share it with them. It's always helpful to like and subscribe to the video and to the channel. So if you feel like doing that, feel free to go ahead, and I will see you all in the next video. Have a good one.